Hello, I'm Milan Czerwiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. When Vladimir Putin landed in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, for a few days, became the capital of post-Soviet diplomacy and the crossroads of post-Soviet anxiety. Putin is there to smile, sign communiques and project calm, but behind the red carpets and photo ops lies a more complicated story. The story in question is one about migrant labor, resentment and the uncomfortable reality that Russia's empire may be shrinking, but its dependencies never left. When the Kremlin says partnership, it often means hierarchy, and few places understand that better than Tajikistan. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Russian President Vladimir Putin arrived in Tajikistan on Wednesday for a 3-day diplomatic mission aimed at reaffirming Moscow's influence in Central Asia. The region has historically been subjected to Russian dominance and is increasingly being tested by China and Western powers. Putin urged Central Asian states to step up trade with Moscow. Regional security and economic cooperation are key areas where Russia seeks to maintain strategic relevance in the region. Accompanying Putin was Russia's defense minister Andriy Belousov, who visited Russia's military base in Tajikistan, one of the country's largest foreign installations. Putin also held talks with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev following months of diplomatic tension between Moscow and Baku. Both leaders, however, reaffirmed good relations between their countries. Russia continues to pursue energy partnerships in Central Asia, including deals to supply natural gas and construct nuclear power plants. However, Beijing has rapidly expanded its economic clout through infrastructure investments, while the European Union has offered Central Asian nations new opportunities for trade and development. This year, the region has hosted major summits with the EU and China, following a similar engagement with Turkey in 2024. Signaling a shift toward a more multipolar dynamic in Central Asia.
And now we're zoning in on the East-splaining portion of our show, taking a closer look at a regional organization that emerged from the ashes of the Soviet Union, namely the Commonwealth of Independent States. What is it? Who belongs to it? And why does it still matter today?
The Commonwealth of Independent States, or CIS, was established in December 1991, following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. It was created as a loose association of former Soviet republics, aiming to facilitate cooperation in political, economic and military affairs, while respecting the sovereignty of its members. Today, the CIS includes 9 member states: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Russia, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. Turkmenistan holds associate member status, while Ukraine and Georgia have formally distanced themselves from the organization. The CIS is headquartered in Minsk, Belarus, and operates through various councils and committees. Its activities range from coordinating border security and counter-terrorism efforts to promoting trade and cultural exchange. However, critics argue that the organization has limited influence and functions more as a symbolic link among post-Soviet states than a powerful regional bloc. Despite its challenges, the CIS continues to serve as a platform for dialogue and cooperation among its members, especially in areas like migration policy, education and sports. For Russia, the CIS remains a strategic tool to maintain influence in its near abroad, while other members see it as a pragmatic way to manage shared interests.
And now, as always, let's take a look at our story in greater detail. On Wednesday, Vladimir Putin made his official state visit to Dushanbe, attending back-to-back gatherings, the Russia-Central Asia Summit and the CIS Heads of State Council. It's his 13th trip to Tajikistan, but his first since relations began to fray under the pressure of war, sanctions and most recently migration tensions. Tajikistan today finds itself in a familiar, fragile position, politically loyal to Moscow, yet economically dependent on it, and socially bruised by it. Over 1.2 million Tajik citizens work in Russia, roughly 1 in 6 of all foreign workers there. They send home almost $2 billion a year, nearly half of Tajikistan's GDP. Those remittances keep families afloat, fill government coffers, and sustain the illusion of stability. But they also give Moscow enormous leverage, and lately, that leverage has been wielded like a club. The March 2024 terrorist attack at Crocus City Hall, which killed 145 people, was a turning point. 4 Tajik citizens were accused, and whether guilty or not, the repercussions were immediate. Russian media unleashed a storm of xenophobia. Central Asian migrants faced beatings, arson attacks, raids. Entire hostels were emptied overnight. Even naturalized citizens received threatening calls from anonymous patriots. In the following weeks, Russia launched one of its largest ever crackdowns on foreign workers, biometric data collection, SIM card deactivations, and pre-registration rules. For the millions of Central Asians who make Russia's cities run, it suddenly became clear you're essential, but not welcome. That tension between economic necessity and social hostility is precisely what Putin will be tiptoeing through in Dushanbe. For decades, the Russia-Tajikistan relationship has revolved around one simple bargain: security for loyalty. Russia maintains its 201st military base in Tajikistan, Moscow's largest foreign facility, a relic of Soviet power repurposed as a supposed shield along the Afghan frontier. It's the physical embodiment of Tajikistan's dependence on Russian protection. Trade, meanwhile, has flourished despite sanctions. Bilateral turnover rose 17% in early 2025. Russian goods flood Tajik markets. Tajik cotton and aluminum head north. On paper, everything looks fine, but numbers cannot disguise resentment. In Tajikistan, Russian media's demonization of migrants isn't seen as an isolated episode, but as betrayal. After all, when half your GDP depends on remittances, every insult cuts twice, once abroad and once at home. Now, Dushanbe is no longer just Russia's loyal partner. It's Russia's mirror, reflecting the costs of empire maintenance in an era of scarcity. So as Putin shakes hands and signs memoranda in Dushanbe, remember, this summit is about survival for both sides. Because in today's Eurasia, dependency is diplomacy, and friendship is another word for necessity. And now, to shed more light on the issue is Bruce Pannier, a board member at the Caspian Policy Center. Hello and welcome once again to Eastern Express.
Thank you for having me.
So the Dushanbe summit is important for many reasons, but there is only one event that really made the headlines, and that was the conversation between Vladimir Putin and Azerbaijan's leader Ilham Aliyev. What do you make of that? Do you think that the relations between the two countries could be on the mend right now?
Well, I mean, Putin basically admitted what everyone already knew, that it was a Russian missile that hit the Azerbaijani plane and caused it to go down. You know, even there, Putin was is kind of a half-hearted admission. I mean, he said shrapnel from the missile. Well, clearly the missile was fired at the plane, you know. So I suppose it goes some way to mending ties. We know that Azerbaijani-Russian ties have not been good since that event happened, and certainly President Aliyev has leveled some criticism at Russia. He's demanded a full apology, admission to the fact that Russia is responsible. But he's also encouraged. He said some encouraging things to the Ukrainians since then too. You know, about they're doing the right thing essentially, and they have every right in the world to defend their own sovereignty, and they should get all their land back. So we'll see how far this goes. I mean, Russian-Azerbaijani relations have never been great for the last couple of years, but they've certainly been worse since last December when the plane went down. It's something that they got together at this summit and actually talked to one another, and Putin did, as I said, made kind of a half-hearted apology for Russia being responsible for the plane going down.
Well, I mean, for the Russians, you could say that it goes far anyway, because they never admitted responsibility for downing an airliner over occupied parts of Ukraine during the first phase of the conflict after 2014 invasion, right? And they never actually admitted that. It was investigated later on. But would you say that also Russia really doesn't have much of a choice, that it has to make concessions because it actually sees its influence slipping away, not just in Azerbaijan, but also in Central Asia, which of course slowly brings us to also what the entire CIS summit was really about?
Yeah, well, one, I think you're absolutely correct with that too. Russia has not many friends in the world these days, and so they got to do what they can to keep such friends as they have together. The CIS summit was an opportunity to kind of draw Azerbaijan a little bit closer to them. Now, as far as the Central Asians, it's really been interesting to watch this. This has been one of the most lackluster summits that I've ever seen, not just the CIS summit, but of course yesterday there was a C5+1, and it was Russia and the Central Asian leaders got together, talked about their own relations. It was so much more subdued than what we've usually seen in the past. I mean, they talked, the general stuff about cooperation, energy cooperation, transport routes, north-south, but there wasn't really a lot of meat on the table there. And if you look at the two other C5+1 summits that they had this year, the European Union in April in Samarkand, and then the China and Central Asia Summit in June in Astana. I mean, those were both big events. The European Union pledged to give 12 billion euros to Central Asia to keep infrastructure projects going, expand the Middle Corridor or Trans-Caspian Corridor, whatever you want to call it. China also signed a lot of investment deals with the Central Asian countries, as they usually do. Russia, at the Russian Central Asian Summit, none of that stuff was there. It was kind of interesting to watch this. I mean, they made a statement. Rahman, the Tajik president, the host president of this summit, said, the Central Asian Central Asian trade with Russia last year came to $45 billion. Okay, that's not an insignificant sum, but when the Central Asians met with the Chinese president in June, they mentioned that the Central Asian Chinese trade last year was $95 billion. So you can see that Russia is slowly losing its influence in the region and kind of grasping at straws. I mean, most of the conversation was about things that were already going. Like I said, energy projects in the future, a little bit about migrant laborers. It's been a hard life for the Central Asian migrant laborers in Russia after the Crocus City Hall attack. But there was nothing new. And there was no mention of huge sums of investment, which of course you'd expect because Russia simply doesn't have the money at the moment to invest a lot in Central Asia.
So which of the Central Asian countries at the present stage is most likely to stick with Russia? I mean, to the extent that they are still, doing business with Russia on an ordinary basis. And which of them is most likely to basically choose other options? Because Central Asia has plenty of options right now. Right? It's becoming a bit of a popular region to talk about, to invest in, for many good reasons. Like these countries are holding many advantages there. For example, Tajikistan still has the issue of many of members of its population actually working in Russia. So there is some dependency there. There is a huge military base that Russia still keeps there. So which of the countries of the region would you say is most likely to maintain good relations with Moscow right now, judging from what we've actually seen recently?
Yeah, well, certainly, as you mentioned, Tajikistan would be top of the list, without a doubt. And Putin made the point of saying yesterday that there's more than 1 million Tajik citizens working in Russia. That's a lot. That's practically 10% of the population. And if you think about the eligible workforce, it's a much higher figure than that. So Tajikistan has that going. You mentioned the military base that Russia has there, too. So that's another thing that's going to keep Tajikistan real close to Russia. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are both dependent on Russia for petroleum products too. And this is an interesting moment, and again shows the kind of waning influence that Russia has. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan's dependence on Russia for gasoline, right, that you need for your cars, is still as high as it ever was. However, Ukrainian attacks on Russian refineries, the drone attacks in Russia, have caused shortages even in Russia itself, and that the ripple effect goes all the way across Central Asia. It's been being felt in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan at the moment also. Kyrgyzstan is right behind Tajikistan for the reasons, almost the same reasons that I said about Tajikistan. There's a Russian military base there too, but again, even these countries see that there's, that Russia's ability to help them out is being reduced. It's decreasing as time goes on. Now, as far as the countries that can do the best without Russia, certainly Kazakhstan is right up there. Unfortunately for Kazakhstan, it shares a 7,800 kilometer long border with Russia, so they can't totally detach. However, Kazakhstan's prospects for running its economy with little or no Russian help at all or influence is much greater than any of the Central Asian countries. Uzbekistan's not far behind that. There was a while where Uzbekistan really, 10, 15 years ago, Uzbekistan didn't trade that much with Russia at all. That said, Uzbekistan obviously benefits from a better trade relationship with Russia than it's had possibly ever lately. And that was one of the things the Uzbek president brought up. And it shows, again, the level we're at with dealing with Russia. The major point that the Uzbek president pointed out was this Agro Express train line that they're trying to get going to bring agricultural goods from Central Asia, specifically Uzbekistan, to Russia. That was the big deal there, and it says a lot about what Russia's standing is right now in Central Asia.
But when we're talking about trade, I mean, when the Russians talk about trade, they also probably mean sanctions dodging, right?
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things when they're talking about trade and building up in industry and factory ties. And you have to wonder, I mean, obviously that's not what they said. But if you read between the lines, you have to wonder if that wasn't what they were getting at, was that, that their partnerships with Central Asian businesses and their expansion of trade routes that come from Central Asia and link them to Russia are the way to funnel some of the products that Russia is unable to obtain directly, but can obtain using partnerships they have with Central Asian states and other countries too.
So now, how do you actually make business with a country that also casually threatens you from time to time? I mean, this applies to Kazakhstan, this also applies to some extent to Azerbaijan. The Russian media is full of these open or implicit threats issued whenever there is any sort of misalignment of policy, right? Whenever these countries are looking towards the West or helping Ukraine in any way whatsoever, there are these, menacing statements being made. Do you think that countries of the region at some point will have enough and will seek a robust security arrangement with somebody else?
Well, they're certainly expanding their security relationship with Turkey, for instance. So that's one place where you can kind of see that Russia is losing a lot of influence. China, of course, has its own security interests in Central Asia, specifically in Afghanistan with Uyghur militant groups that are based in Afghanistan at the moment. So they're upping their game in Central Asia too. You made a good point though about Russia making these threatening statements every now and then. I mean, I don't think it was coincidence that just a few days ago there was some buzz in the Russian media that some of the drones that had hit refineries in Siberia could have been coming from Kazakhstan, right? It sounds pretty preposterous, and I mean the likelihood is extremely small that happened, but they threw that out right before the summit came up. And I think that was kind of a nod to not just Kazakhstan, but Central Asia too, to remember that Russia's watching, and Russia is their main security partner, like it or not, and that it won't do the Central Asian states any good to try to detach too quickly from Russia, certainly in terms of security cooperation.
Bruce Pannier was our guest here today on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us, and as always, for providing deep insight into the subject.
Thank you so much for having me today.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Russian leader Vladimir Putin has acknowledged that Russian air defenses fired missiles at an Azerbaijani airliner before it crashed last December. The admission came during talks with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev in Dushanbe.
During a meeting with his Azerbaijani counterpart, Putin revealed that 2 missiles exploded near the Azerbaijan Airlines flight, causing it to crash in Kazakhstan and kill 38 out of 67 people on board. He partially blamed the incident on Ukrainian drones spotted in the area and said he only learned the full details 2 days ago. The Russian president offered condolences and promised a legal review and compensation. The flight, traveling from Baku to Grozny, was forced to change course before going down. Earlier investigations had already pointed to Russian air defenses as the cause. Putin's admission marks a rare moment of accountability and comes after months of diplomatic strain. Aliyev welcomed the update and thanked Putin for personally overseeing the investigation. The meeting follows a recent phone call between the two leaders, their first in months, signaling a possible step towards easing tensions.
Belarus has ramped up fuel shipments to Russia amid Moscow's supply crisis, but experts warn the move could cost Minsk its lucrative exports to other countries. The surge comes as Russia battles fuel shortages caused by Ukrainian drone strikes.
Belarusian gasoline and diesel exports to Russia by rail quadrupled in September. The increase coincides with fuel rationing and price freezes in several Russian regions, following attacks on refineries and energy infrastructure. Belarus has been using Russian ports to export fuel since 2021, but shipments to third countries dropped nearly 40% this year due to reduced refinery output. Experts say Belarus may struggle to meet Russia's growing demand without cutting exports elsewhere. Russia has proposed monthly imports of up to 300,000 tons from Belarus, but analysts doubt Belarusian refineries can sustain that level. Even at full capacity, they say, Belarus can't supply Russia, meet domestic needs and maintain current export volumes. Economic observers warn that if Belarus prioritizes Russia, it may lose higher-paying foreign clients, leading to price hikes at home.
Ukraine's parliament has approved the first reading of a bill to create a cyber force within its military, marking a major step in modernizing its defenses against Russia. The move reflects the growing role of cyber warfare in the ongoing conflict.
Backed by 255 lawmakers, the new bill establishes a Cyber Forces Command tasked with defending Ukraine's cyberspace and critical infrastructure. The unit will be formed by the General Staff's Cyber Warfare Directorate and will recruit both full-time and reserve cyber specialists. Service in the reserves won't require formal enlistment and can be temporary or task-based, part of Ukraine's broader effort to address personnel shortages. The bill also aims to align Ukraine's cyber capabilities with NATO standards. Cyber attacks have become a key battleground in the war, with both sides targeting government systems and strategic industries. The legislation must pass a second reading and be signed by the president before becoming law.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.